All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome in to today's session. And we have 2 more minutes to go. So we're going to give everybody some more time to join us. Meanwhile, sit tight. And today we're going to discuss something really exciting, interesting, mainly about day one CPT and also alternatives. Let me just start recording in terms that I forgot. And today we have a new guest with us. I'm very excited to introduce him to everybody. We have immigration attorney David Gluckman with us. So he is a very experienced immigration attorney. He was also featured by Bloomberg as an immigration expert, and he spoke his opinion on day one CPT. And GoElite was also interviewed by Bloomberg, even though our piece wasn't featured on the article. But today, I just feel like it's a great opportunity to speak on this topics. I feel like lots of students under their OPT, H-1B are very curious about, what's next after this post, and then what is the details about day one CPT? Is it under any risks? They want to learn more about RFE, about stuff like that. So Davis here is gonna give everybody a presentations, and then we're gonna have a second half live Q&A session. So everybody can ask questions. If you come in with the questions, feel free to send that into the Q&A right now. Our teammate Shama is gonna collect all of your questions, and hopefully we can answer as much questions as we could. I think we're right on time. I'm gonna get this started. All right, welcome in everyone. Today we're gonna talk about focus on day one CPT. A recent post from Bloomberg has came out mainly on day one CPT and on Harrisburg Universities. And we're gonna cover, is day one CPT really in a challenging position after this coverage? And then we're also going to discuss more details surrounding day one CPT. For example, the risk factors, what are the right practices, what are the RFEs and possible solutions. We're going to also discuss some alternatives. If you're not selected by H-1B, how could you work in the USA? And then one of the most heated topics everybody are interested in knowing is the election result. What would that do with the future immigration policies? We also, if we have the time, we're also gonna briefly, talk a little bit about, Trump won. What would that possibly mean to immigration? And as I mentioned, we'll have a half live Q&A session at the second half. So be patient and then ask your questions in the Q&A session. We will collect them and answer as much as we could. Before we go in, I do want to introduce just a little bit about who we are. So we're GoElite located in Los Angeles. We are a education consultancy. We mainly focus on day one CPT university application guidance. We sometimes will help out consult students with F1 reinstatement, emergency transfer, or change of status cases. And then we're certified by AIRC as the most respectful organization in education. A few things I wanted to share. Now we launched our rewards programs, so we wanted to make the experience for our students even better. So we wanted to create a community. Once you join the community, we will later share the link with you. Once you joined, you can earn rewards points, and they can get you some incentives. And then we also wrote a book. We have a red book for F1 students that will cover visa, housing, healthcare, work, those kind of things. And the book is all free. We'll also share the link with you. So if you are interested in learning more, feel free to check them out. We are on Google Reviews. We currently have more than 500 students reviews. So you can go ahead and see what other people rate GoElite. And we're also on all social media channels. So feel free to follow us on socials and discover the latest news about day one CPT. All right, I will stop sharing from there. And then Davis, maybe you can give us a brief introduction.
Yes, hi. I'm David Gluckman. I am an immigration attorney and a director of the Immigration Practice Group at a law firm called McCandlish Holton in Richmond, Virginia. And we represent students and scholars and faculty and basically people from all walks of life from all over the world. My passion personally is to help smart people to stay in the United States because despite what some people might think, I do believe it's the key to our nation's future. And unfortunately, our immigration system is astonishingly imperfect. So what I'm going to be here today and what I generally do during my presentations is I try to identify the options that are available within the current framework so that you can try to navigate your journey towards green card and ultimately U.S. citizenship. So if you want, I can start sharing my presentation
Absolutely.
and we'll get started. So the main focus of the presentation today is going to be day one CPT. Now, day one CPT, I think, gets a really bad reputation. As you can see, I've got our article here that was in Bloomberg recently. People think that there's something wrong with day one CPT, that there's some sort of black mark against you if you participate in a day one CPT program. And I'm here today to tell you that it is a totally legitimate option for folks who really don't have anything else that's available to allow them to continue working for their employer, again, because of the limitations of our immigration system. And if you see in that article, I'm quoted as talking about, why are we so outraged at day one CPT when the true outrage should be directed at our outdated immigration system, which basically forces these types of loophole options. But, I think beyond just a loophole option, I think it's a totally legitimate option that is grounded in the regulations. And if you find a reputable program, it's certainly good enough to hopefully get you through to the next stage of the immigration process. So let's sort of set the stage here. So let's say I'm a student. I come to the United States and I graduate from the program that I was participating in. What do I get? Well, after I graduate as an F1 student, F1 student status, I get something called optional practical training, which everybody under the sun calls OPT. And that allows me for 12 months to work in a field, in a job that's related to my field of study. If I have a STEM degree, then I get an additional 24 months of work authorization under OPT to work in my STEM field of study. This one, I've got to work for an E-Verify employer, but that's generally not a problem this day and age because most employers are already enrolled in E-Verify. So that's great. So I have 12 months. I have up to 36 months here. So that's 3 years of OPT. It allows me, what's really key about OPT is to build a relationship with an employer. Because unlike some of the future immigration sponsorship options we're going to talk about, which do require the employers to participate, employers don't really have to do anything for OPT. So you pay the fee, you file the forms, you show up on day one ready to work, and the employer works with you for a year, you get trained, they trust you, they get to know you, they really like you. It's going to be a no-brainer then for them to want to sponsor you for future visa options. So what is the general option that comes next after OPT? And that's the H-1B visa, which probably a lot of folks have heard about. It is the most common work visa for university graduates, and it seems like it's tailor-made for people in that situation. So it requires an employer to sponsor an individual, so an employee, for a job that requires at least a bachelor's degree in a specific field, and they've got to pay at least the prevailing wage. Well, that's generally not an issue. I mean, if you're graduating with a specific degree, you're generally going to get a job with that degree. And with the market rate salary nowadays, especially if you have some experience, it's generally not going to be a problem to get paid at least that prevailing wage. So yeah, that sounds pretty great, right? So there's Tony the Tiger. But, I knew there was something here. There's a cap, okay? And that is the main drawback, is we have a quota system here in the United States on H-1Bs, and it dates back to 1990, okay, this number. So for folks who aren't old enough to remember the world in 1990, we did not really have an internet. We didn't have an IT field. Those are the main users of the H-1B program. So while this 65,000 plus 20,000, so that's 85,000, while that might have been enough to satisfy the economy back in 1990, it is woefully insufficient in 2024. And you can look at that by the numbers. So last year, so fiscal year 2025, which is what we're in right now, there were 470,000 registrations submitted for those 85,000 slots. So spoiler alert, you're probably not going to get picked in the lottery. So through no fault of your own, even though you're totally qualified for the H-1B and you have an employer that's ready to sponsor you, you got to get a quota number, and sometimes you might get one, but oftentimes, given the numbers, you're not going to win the lottery. Okay. And this might happen one, two, three times. Because remember, when you have STEM OPT, that's three different chances you have at the lottery. So your first year of OPT and each year of STEM OPT. Okay. So you're not going to get picked in the lottery most of the time. So you're thinking, okay, well, then what options are left for me? So there are certain nationality specific options for people who have passports from Canada, Mexico, Chile, Singapore, Australia. I mean, that's good, but not many people have those passports. Okay, so what's next? Okay, you got an O1 visa. Well, that sounds great, but you have to have extraordinary ability in your field. And generally, if you're just graduating from college or even a master's program, you're not going to have made significant achievements enough in the field to be able to obtain and qualify for this visa. Okay, so that's off. Then you have an E1 and E2 visa. So those are for people who are more entrepreneurs, who want to engage in international trade or want to invest in either starting up a business or buying a business in the United States. Well, that also sounds great. However, you have to have a passport from a country with whom the United States has a qualifying treaty in order to qualify for E1 or E2 status. And unfortunately, some of the biggest countries we don't have treaties with are China, India, Russia, and Brazil. So those folks are not going to be eligible for this. So, okay, we're going through all these options here, and I'm starting to run out here. Okay, well, what about a marriage-based green card? Well, sure, if you marry a U.S. citizen, you can potentially get a green card and you can get work authorization that way. But even in that situation, you're probably going to be looking at a significant gap in employment because even after your OPT runs out and you file the marriage-based green card case, it's going to take several months to get the work card. So even in that situation, you're going to be looking at an imperfect solution. So if you don't have any of those options available to you and you have this degree, you have this job, you have an employer that wants to keep employing you, are you all dressed up with no place to go? Where does that leave you? And that is where you enter day one CPT as a potential solution. Okay. So day one CPT. So CPT stands for curricular practical training. And this is a benefit of F1 status. So remember OPT that we were talking about, that is for post-graduation work authorization. CPT is work authorization that you're eligible for while you have F1 status and while you are making progress towards your degree, okay? So this curricular practical training solution is an excellent one for people who have that job and who want to continue working while advancing their education. So let's say you want to get a second master's degree, in a field that is something that you deal with every day in work, then that's certainly an option for you. So where does the authority for day one CPT come from? Well, for folks who are, interested in the legal field, or people who are having problems falling asleep, then I highly recommend that you take a look at this regulation. It's 8 CFR. So CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations. It's 214.2 F10.1. So it's a singular regulation, but it's very dense. And here are the different requirements that they have in there for CPT. So first, it's got to be an integral part of an established curriculum. So you can't just have free-floating work authorization. It's got to be part of an actual degree program. It's got to be tethered to something academic so that you can say, yes, this is practical training that is advancing what I'm learning in my classroom, and I'm getting credit for this, course credit, institutional credit, etc. Okay. It's also got to be directly related to your major area of study. Okay, so that's generally going to be the requirement for all kinds of practical training. Curricular practical training, or CPT, is no different. Okay, and what's really nice about day one CPT, and it really trumps some of these other options where you actually have to apply for a work card, is that you can start working as soon as the school issues that I-20 form. So you go in to your advisor's office on campus and you walk out with the document that you need to start working. So that's far different from having to spend $470, apply with immigration for a work card and have to wait months and have to pay premium processing of almost $2,000 just to get a decision in even a month. Here you get work authorization immediately, so there's no gap in employment. Okay, so that's a huge, huge benefit of day one CPT. And why is it called day one CPT as opposed to just CPT? Well, because ordinarily CPT is only available after you've been enrolled for a year in that degree program. And day one CPT is the exception where you can get, instead of having to wait 1 year, you can get it immediately if you are enrolled in a graduate program that requires immediate participation in CPT. Okay. And that's the buzz phrase from that regulation. There's got to be an immediate requirement for folks to be participating in that work experience to augment what they're learning in the classroom. All right, so really important to understand that. So now that you kind of get the framework for day one CPT, how do you choose a day one CPT program? Okay, so the first question is, day one CPT is supposed to be, and this is hilariously enough from 1991 guidance. This is the latest we have from immigration on this. It's supposed to only be for compelling circumstances. Okay, so how is the school presenting these? So in other words, if you are staring down the barrel of a request for evidence from immigration and they're saying, okay, well, what are the compelling circumstances? what is the student, what is the school able to furnish you? Do they have a catalog that goes through this? Do they have specific examples and explanations? I mean, for example, I have several catalogs here from Harrisburg University, for instance, that goes through and talks about how their degree program has evolved to meet the challenges of the modern working world, which is beyond just going into a classroom, studying, taking tests. You've got to actually go out into the world and get practical training to augment what you're learning in the classroom. That is what the modern environment's about. And then they also talk about how practical experience is required to prepare you for your capstone project in your degree, which is generally going to be an internship project that you have to go out in the field to do. So really, do they have good materials out there that explain why CPT is required for that part of the degree program? Make sure you're examining that, looking at the website, et cetera, talking to Ryan, maybe seeing what they have to say about it. The next question is, what is the connection between the work and the curriculum? Remember, it's got to be an integral part of the curriculum, the established curriculum. So it's really got to be the curriculum that's driving the boat instead of just your desire for employment, right? So you've got to be able to go through and see what it is that you're going to be able to prove that you're not just getting this for work authorization, but it really is legitimately to contribute to your education. So these classes that you're going to take in these programs, they've got to have some kind of academic deliverables. So we're talking about, not just that you do a TPS report at work and you turn that in for a grade. No, you've got to have something besides what you're doing in the workplace. Okay. You got to have projects, papers, et cetera, that you turn in for a grade, not just something you print out from your email inbox at work and you print and you turn in. Okay. So you've got to be able to show ultimately, if you get a request for evidence, and we're going to talk about that in a second, about what you're doing day to day in the workplace and how that relates to the specific coursework that you're doing. So even going to the syllabus of that particular course and relating the stuff from that syllabus to the duties that you're doing at work. Okay, really important to understand that and to be able to make that connection. Does the school have a sufficient academic infrastructure? Again, I do these kinds of presentations, and it's true that there are no hard and fast rules here. But again, I think I refer to it as sort of a smell test. If you have a new upstart day one CPT institution that's in a strip mall next to a massage parlor, that's probably not going to pass a smell test. Okay. Something like Harrisburg, if you read that article, they're an established university for almost 25 years. They have on-campus students. They have legitimate, academic buildings and all that. That's going to be something that, if questioned, is going to be much more easy to satisfy immigration that this is a legitimate program, regardless of what they think of day one CPT. So definitely make sure that you're not cheaping out, that you're not skimping, and that you're not trying to cut corners, because you can find a reputable program that should not cause you any problems in the future. And then another question, and this is one, again, it's all about, there's no hard and fast rule, but this is the $64,000 question, is how much on-campus presence is required? Okay, it's inconvenient a lot of times, especially if you live in a different state from where this college is located. You're like, oh God, I don't want to have to drag myself every weekend over the border, to drive 500 miles to go to 2 hours of classes. I'd rather just do this work in my kitchen. Sure, I understand that. But if you're going to be at an institution that says, oh, you only have to come in once a semester, how do you think that's going to look to immigration if you ultimately apply for a change of status or for a green card? It's not going to be looking great. So while it might be legitimate under the regulations, and there really isn't any required minimum, the only thing in the regulations is that you can only have one fully remote class per semester. But apart from that, I mean, it doesn't say you have to be on campus, 50 hours or whatever. But what I've seen, and I just go by, is what I've encountered in my practice, which is that for schools that have required 6 times a year, a semester, I haven't really had any problems with that. I've never had a denial on that. 9 times, even better. 3 times, one time, I mean, I've gotten some of those approved, but given the election results and how this is potentially going to be coming under more scrutiny, those approvals may not continue. So I would be more conservative on that. And if there's a choice between something that requires only 3 times a semester and something that requires 6 times a semester, I would really go with the 6 times a semester, just to be sure, again, to keep up appearances and to prevent you from failing that smell test. Okay, so it's really important to take these things into mind. So this is what your situation is. So you're like, okay, all right, this sounds good. But I'm reading all these things about day one CPT. I'm reading this Bloomberg article. I'm kind of worried that this seems like it's too good to be true. I don't want to fall into a trap. What are the things that I need to be worried about, what I need to try to protect myself against before I enroll in something like this? So the first thing, and I alluded to this, is that when you're in day one CPT, a lot of times you're just doing it to buy time, to buy an opportunity to either complete the green card process or maybe get selected in the lottery. So ultimately, if that happens, like let's say I do get selected in the lottery, then my employer is going to file the H-1B petition. At that point, immigration is going to scrutinize your immigration history and try to poke any holes in it that they might see. And part of that examination might bring up your use of day one CPT. Okay. And I have a sample request for evidence right here that I've gotten in the past, and they're all pretty much the same kinds of templates. And I'll read off some of the general requests they have. I mean, most of them are just like, well, how do you prove that you were in school? Okay, so they want an attendance record. Explain how you're able to enroll in the school even though you live 500 miles away. Well, I've had responses where I even have hotel bills, toll receipts, all these things, and we just explain. I mean, this is really not a foreign concept to most people because we have these types of executive degree programs for Americans. So it's really just the same kind of degree program. It just has an international student population. Okay. And then they want to know about the letter from your employer, just explaining what you did so that they can show, so that you are able to show the linkage between what your duties are and what the coursework that you've been performing. You go through that in the form of an affidavit or a narrative from yourself, where you go through and attach the syllabi from the various courses and you make that explanation. So really, and then they want to ask about why day one CPT is required by your institution. And for most of these schools, they should already have a standard set of papers that they can give you whenever you get these RFEs. They should not be surprised by this at all. Okay. So they give you the standard set, like, for example, that Harrisburg example I was talking about, where they explain why experiential learning is important as part of their program. They give you those course catalogs, they give you those printouts, they give you those standard explanations that you can include in your request for evidence response. And I will tell you that I have gotten many, many of these RFEs, and I have not ever received a single denial. Okay. And this is going back to Trump one. This is through Biden, even back to Obama. Okay. And day one CPT was not as popular back then, but I did get some of these RFEs, never had any issue with them. So it's all about being able to be proactive, understanding that you're in the making the right choice in terms of the institution, getting that paperwork ready so that if you do file for a change of status, and also the same thing happens when you're applying for a green card, they'll scrutinize your immigration history, then you're able to meet the burdens of this. Okay. Well, let's say, God forbid, I file for the change of status to the H-1B and it's denied. Well, guess what? It's not the end of the world, because what happens when you apply, when your employer files an H-1B petition for you, is there are two different component adjudications. So the first component adjudication is, does this job qualify for H-1B in terms of, does it require at least a bachelor's degree? Are you going to be paid the prevailing wage? Okay, so that's one component adjudication. The second component adjudication is, does this person qualify for a change of status, meaning did they maintain their immigration status? Were there any violations or problems with that? So if they had a problem with day one CPT or something that you submitted, then what generally will happen is they will approve that first component of adjudication. They'll approve the H-1B component of the adjudication. They'll deny the change of status, and you would just have to go overseas, process the H-1B visa at your consular post, and re-enter on H-1B, and you can continue to work. So I've not really had anybody have any problems doing something like that in analogous situations. Like I told you, I haven't had any day one CPT denials, but for people who had some OPT issues where they weren't able to get approved, other types of status violations, generally they haven't had any problems consular processing. It's just a little bit disruptive. And again, you'll be able to certainly, if they had any issues with your day one CPT usage, you can make those arguments to the consular officer as well, and you shouldn't have any issues with that generally. All right, so another issue is when you're on day one CPT, the question is, can I travel? Okay, and I generally say not a good idea, because if you recall, the F1 student visa requires you to have an intention to return to your home country after you're done with your degree program. And oftentimes people who are on day one CPT have already completed one degree program, maybe two degree programs. So years and years away from having lived in your country the last time. In addition to that, you're engaging in day one CPT. You've been building a career. So all the indications are that you have no intention of returning home after you're done. Okay. And that is a basis to deny the F1 visa. So I generally say to people who are in F1, who are in day one CPT programs, not to travel outside the United States unless there's an absolute emergency. The time to travel would be once you finally do get your H-1B, because the H-1B, unlike the F-1, is a so-called dual intent visa, which means that you can intend to immigrate permanently to the United States and still qualify to enter on an H-1B visa. So none of those issues about having to show an intention to return home are any kind of relevance to the H-1B process. Okay. And then this is just a technicality, and almost nobody falls into this, but if you engage in 365 days of full-time CPT at a particular degree level, then you're not going to be eligible for the post-graduation OPT. But oftentimes you're going to be already in the flip situation where you've already used your OPT and you're doing a second CPT, a second degree at the same level. So you're almost never going to run into this situation. And even if you are going to be potentially in this situation, almost always an immigration advisor will flag it so you can make sure that you don't run afoul of that. Okay. So nothing that you have to really be concerned about with that. All right, so I'm going to wrap up this portion of the presentations because I want to get to some questions. But what are some best practices? Well, I've been saying this throughout. Choose a reputable program. Consult with Ryan and GoElite. Talk to people. See what they've gone through. I mean, there are a lot of people who've gone through these programs, and they can tell you about their experiences. And it's not that hard to find information online. There are several websites that they can recommend. Detailed contemporaneous documentation is key. What does contemporaneous mean? It means at the time of. Okay, so let's say that I'm engaged in day one CPT for a particular employer. That's the time to get a detailed letter of employment from your employer to talk about what you did and what your duties were and your dates of employment. Because what happens later on is, let's say 4 years down the line, I'm finally selected in the lottery and I file my H-1B and they issue an RFE asking for an employment letter. And now that company doesn't exist anymore. The employer, the contact there is no longer accessible. I don't know where they've gone. It's a complete nightmare. So make sure that while you are there, that is the best time to get that documentation. Okay. Pretend you are preparing for an audit. Okay. I told you this day one CPT is totally legitimate. It's fine under the regulations, but you may get questioned on it, just like the IRS may question you if you file a tax return. Okay. The best offense is a good defense. Okay. So just make sure that you're compiling that documentation so that if you do have an RFE or there is an issue, you're easily able to present the legitimacy of what you've been doing. Okay. And this is another thing that came up in that Bloomberg article. Again, it's all about the smell test. Remember, if you start a program, I generally recommend that you finish it. Okay. There are lots of people in that article. They're like, okay, well, I was in this degree program for day one CPT. And as soon as I got selected in the lottery, I dropped out of school and I just went with my H-1B. Later on, that just begs the question to an immigration adjudicator. It's like, well, was this really a legitimate use of CPT? Obviously, this was just something you were doing to work and not to get a degree because you didn't even finish the degree program. You obviously don't care about the academic component, which is supposedly the number one feature and the number one concern of CPT. So if you can, and I understand it's expensive, but let's say you're close to the end of the degree program, I think it's worth finishing it, not only to have that academic credential, but to show the legitimacy of the program and the legitimacy of your use of CPT for academic purposes. And then I think this goes without saying, but don't say anything stupid. Okay. In that article, there was a guy in there who just said, nobody goes to these programs to get a degree. That is a classic example of something that is completely stupid to say. So that's not something you're going to want to say to a consular officer. It's not something you're going to want to say to immigration. You need to be able to convince them that this was an academic program that happened to have work component, but that work component was an integral part of that academic program, and you're there to get that degree. That's the way it needs to be. Not anything stupid that's going to get you into some trouble. Okay, so I know you guys want to talk about this election consequences. So Donald J. Trump is now coming back to the Oval Office in January. Can he, as soon as he gets sworn in on the Capitol steps, can he go back to the Oval Office and say day one CPT is over? And the answer is that no, he does not have the power to just all of a sudden end day one CPT or any practical training for that matter. Because remember that regulation that I mentioned, he can't override a regulation that exists that carries the force of law. So if he wants to do something about day one CPT, he's going to have to do something through USCIS, which is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the domestic benefits granting immigration agency in the United States. So what can they do? Well, what they can do is a couple of things. First, the most drastic thing is they can try to change that regulation and either limit or remove CPT altogether. But that is going to be a very lengthy process because they're required, if they're going to make a change like that, they've got to notify the public, and then the public is going to be given at least a 60-day opportunity to provide public comments and to respond to the proposal. Okay. And then after that, USCIS is then going to spend many months going through those comments. And I urge folks to pay attention to this and make sure that your voice is heard. And the more comments they receive, the longer it's going to take them to process them, and the longer it's going to take them to make a final decision. So they have to go through all those comments and respond to them. And then they'll make their final decision, either modifying their proposal or abandoning it altogether. So this is going to be a many, many month-long process. So hopefully you will be tipped off significantly or sufficiently in advance so that you can make potential plans and certainly let your voices be heard. Okay, so that's one thing they do. That's the most drastic thing. What the Trump administration did last time and what they're likely to do this time is that they just take the existing law, the existing regulation, and they just apply it more harshly than in years past. Okay. So when Trump was in office last time, they used a part of that rule, that regulation, to try to say that practical training is limited to 12 months. Okay. Well, that was from the preamble to the rule. Okay. So that already not making sense because it's not the substantive part of the rule. And if that were true, then that would undermine the ability of people to engage in STEM OPT because that's 24 months. So it just really made no sense. And they sort of backed away from that. But that just is an example of how they can try to crack down on things. Like I told you, that compelling circumstances, that is something from 1991. So they can decide in an agency memo what they consider to be compelling circumstances or what circumstances would justify immediate CPT. And I can see them saying, okay, well, it's only for people who are in medical schools or nursing programs, that those types of things that require you to go into a hospital or something to actually get some experience. So they can try doing those things. Again, I think it'd be vulnerable to litigation, and I certainly litigate a lot of cases. I'd be happy to litigate that one. I think it would have a good chance of being stopped. So they can do those types of things. Now, what can Congress do? Okay, so this is a really interesting thing is people don't understand, but there's really no statute or no law in the Immigration and Nationality Act that establishes OPT, CPT, or any of this stuff. It's all based on the F1 student visa statute. So based on that statute, immigration has over the years interpreted that statute, and those regulations said, yes, we understand that it's for a student, but we think that part of being a student is also getting practical training and experience in the workplace. So, I mean, I guess Congress could go and pass a law saying that F1 visas are only for classroom studies, but I just don't think they're going to get into the weeds there. And even if they did, I'm not sure that that's going to get enough support to actually pass. Okay, so I think we're more likely to look at different regulatory reforms instead of that. Okay. Now, in terms of outside of CPT and outside of OPT, what are some things that we can expect from the Trump administration for other immigration things? And I think, again, it's going to be more of the same stuff. So H-1Bs became more difficult because they were insisting on, they were really cracking down on staffing companies' use of the H-1B program. So they're look for people to challenge that. They were proposing a lottery that was not going to be a random H-1B lottery, but it was going to be based on the salary you were going to be paid. And that actually might work out to the benefit of the folks who are on day one CPT, because oftentimes you guys are not working in entry-level positions. You're already pretty far along in your careers. So if it is a salary-based lottery, then you may get a leg up on people versus people who are just graduating from college, maybe at a bachelor's degree level, who are just trying to get an entry-level job. So, there are some positives and negatives that might happen, but ultimately, it's very very difficult to guess at this point. I think the easiest thing and the most indicative thing is just to look at what he did during his first term to see the types of changes that you can expect here. So I'm going to stop now, and I want to take questions from folks for the rest of the time we have. But I do want to encourage people to reach out to me if you have any immigration questions or if you need help with any of these types of filings. I do these all the time. And again, I really care about helping smart people stay in the United States. And reach out to me, and I'll try to help.
Wonderful, wonderful information, David. Thank you so much. This was a very resourceful presentation. We all learned a lot
Thank
around the
you.
Day-1 CPT. And, I don't want to waste anybody's time. I'm going to go straight into the Q&A. We did collect lots and lots of questions from our students. Unfortunately, we might not be able to answer each one of your questions. So some of them already being answered. We will skip it for now, but I will deliver the recordings to all of you. So don't worry, you can go back to any point and rewatch the presentations. Let's go from question number 3. During change of status, is there a difference in risk between F1 to H1B versus F1 to I-485? Is it better to go straight from F1 to I-485? I guess this is more about let's say a day 1 CPT to H1B versus a day 1 CPT to like a EB green card application.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think generally my philosophy is that if you're eligible to apply to submit the I-485, you should just do that as early as you possibly can. And the reason for that are twofold. First, you never know what's going to happen with the visa bulletin. So the visa bulletin comes out every month, right? And that just determines what the cutoff dates are for the people that particular month who can file their green card application. All right. So let's say that I'm finally, after waiting 2 years, I'm current, and I can file my I-485. Well, if I then am like, well, I don't know, maybe I'll go and get the H-1B and try to get that in place, and that takes a month, and then all of a sudden the next month's visa bulletin goes backwards like a year, then I'm really out of luck. So generally, my recommendation is to work with an immigration attorney, look at your immigration history, and if there's nothing that would prevent you from getting approval for I-485, then I would go ahead and file it as early as possible, because the same issues with day 1 CPT are going to resurface, and regardless of whether you apply directly off of the F1 or if you wait until apply for after you have H-1B, because they scrutinize your entire immigration history, which again is important, which emphasizes, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but having that documentation from your CPT participation is key to being able to meet these challenges that they raise in these types of RFEs.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question. I think we already addressed this question a lot, but I think a lot of the audience come in with this question to have in mind. So let's just, if we
All
can
right, go
have
for it.
a little bit more time just to address this just a little bit. Is it possible that once Trump government take over, that will make day 1 CPT in a bad situation, for example, like illegal, banned, something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I just talked about in my last slide. I mean, there are certain things that they can do. I mean, can they eliminate day 1 CPT altogether? Yes, but they have to go through that regulatory notice and comment process that I mentioned that's going to take many, many months. And it's probably going to be vulnerable to legal challenge. And like I said, Trump can't just do it as soon as he gets sworn in, because there's a regulation there that specifically authorizes it. And he can't, by executive fiat or executive order, override a regulation that's in place. So it's not going to be something that they're going to be able to do easily. It's not to say they can't do it. It's just that it's going to take some time. It's going to give you guys an opportunity to make your voices heard, potentially challenge it in court. It's going to be at least a year or more before you see anything with that. The more likely thing you're going to see is that they might scrutinize these things more closely by more harshly applying the regulations. But again, if you're able to make that showing of why immediate participation was required for that degree program, get good documentation from your school, get good documentation from your employer, then you should be able to meet the challenges. Because like I said, I was getting these RFEs during the first Trump administration. We were still getting them approved. So, I don't see it as being as bleak as some people do. But, just following these best practices is going to put you in the best position possible to go meet these challenges.
All right, let's go to next questions. This person mentioned that he or she might have consulted with somebody else that mentioned that day 1 CPT students were considered out of status, which I don't know if this is true information. But this might happen again in this administration. Any take on this point? Again, for me, I don't think this is true, but what do you think, David?
Well, it's wrong. I mean, I'm not going to speak ill of my profession, but there are a lot of people out there that don't know anything about F1 status and about students. Okay. Immigration is a very broad practice. So if my practice is all about representing people in immigration court, representing asylum applicants at the border, then I'm not going to really have the knowledge necessary to advise on these types of issues like F1 CPT. That's not going to stop a lot of people from giving that advice, unfortunately. And even broader than that, for people who are not immigration attorneys and who are advising, they probably have no idea what they're talking about because immigration is such a specialized area. So, my short answer is I think you're asking the wrong person these questions. And my long answer is refer back to my presentation. It's totally legitimate. And you're in status while you're in an F1 day one CPT program because you're authorized by your school to do that. Your CVIS record, which is the government database that determines whether or not you're in status, is active. The only time that you fall out of status is when your CVIS record is deactivated, and that's only if, for whatever reason, you're terminated by your school for something that can be any number of reasons, but generally not because you're engaged in day one CPT. So I don't know who you were talking to, but probably need to talk to somebody else like me.
Well put, David. And then that would be also my only recommendation is that when you run into some specific situations, always consider to do a legal consultation with a professional who truly knows about what they're talking about. And then that's why I also wanted to mention today's session, we're not giving any legal advice to anybody. This is for education and experiences sharing purposes only. So if you wanted to, learn a little bit deeper, maybe dig into your own personal situation, you can scan the code. We can connect you with David and maybe you guys can schedule a session to talk more in depth about your situations here. But this is not a legal consultation, and don't really trust anybody's opinion on this. You really have to do enough research in terms of things yourself. Okay, let's move on. Next question, I think, is a really good question. If my STAN OPT has already expired, can I still regain legal status if I go to another school and then start day one CPT? What would this process be?
Well, generally you have STEM OPT and it expires. You have a 60-day grace period to remain in the United States. But you really need to get your record transferred over to that new school before it's too late. So generally you can have because you have a 5 month gap. That's the maximum that's allowed. So if you're going to be starting classes within 5 months of when you stopped with your OPT, then that's going to be fine. It's just that you need to make sure that you coordinate with your international students office at your current school where you got the STEM degree and the new school where you're going to want to enroll in day one CPT. Make sure that they transfer your record to that new school as quickly as possible before any applicable deadlines. And that's something you're definitely going to want to run by the international students office because if you do request it too late, then it's going to be a nightmare situation where you either have to try to get reinstatement and get reactivated or even travel outside the United States to re-enter. And that I almost never advise just for those reasons I talked about when I was discussing travel on day one CPT.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think my only recommendation is to try to do as soon as you can because David mentioned that you only have 60 days once the OPT expires. So if you try to do the CVIS transfer after the 60 days, your old school might terminate your CVIS. So better do it sooner than later. All right, let's move on. This person is saying that I am a part of a school that requires once every term on-site presence, and it's roughly about 3 times every year. How many times would you recommend per year physical presence? You mentioned 6 times, 3 times, but what would the time frame be? I guess the time frame is, for example, like in how many hours would you recommend per presence? Because I understand some university do like the 1 day, some university do
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
three
exactly.
days.
So, yeah, the way it usually works is that, it's either on a Saturday or maybe a Monday evening. It's like a dedicated evening where you'll have back-to-back classes or something like that.
Mhm.
I would say 3 times a semester. I think it could be okay in terms of getting approved now. But, as we prepare for potential more harsh application of these regulations under the Trump administration, I would recommend something more like 6 times a semester. So, I didn't have any problems with that under his prior administration. And again, there's no hard and fast rule. So all we can look to is prior adjudications as guidance. And they proved that before, and hopefully they'll continue to approve it in his new incoming 47th presidency. So, but I think 3 times a semester. Again, it's all about the smell test. Does that look like it's more about academics, or does that look more like an excuse to just continue working? I think I could see either way. You can make the case, but just by looking at that, the optics are not excellent.
And then just one clarification. Were you saying about per year basis or a per semester basis?
Semester,
Okay.
semester.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. All right, let's move on. Is travel restrictions precautions? What are the precautions for travels are for a doctor program as well? I'm not sure what doctoral has to do with this, but I guess in terms of travel restrictions, this person wanted to know like international travel. Is it also with a doctoral program? I guess it
Well,
is.
look, it's the same thing as anything. All right. So I'm assuming you're talking about an F1, you're an F1 student and you're in a doctoral program, right? Well, it's the same as if you were in a bachelor's program. The F1 requires you to show that you have an intention to return to your home country after you completed your program. If I'm an 18-year-old student and I'm applying for the first time at the consulate for my visa, I'm already living there. I've been living there my whole life. It's much easier for me to make that explanation and show that I intend to return home. If I have already completed a bachelor's degree, I've completed a master's degree, I'm now completing a doctoral degree. So I've already been in the United States for possibly 10 years or more. Okay. So that's how long I've been away from my country. And I've already engaged in maybe several levels of OPT. Okay. Then it's going to be a lot harder if I apply for an F1 visa as a doctoral student to show that I legitimately intend to return to my home country after the completion of my studies. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that you're at that point very far removed from the last time you lived in your home country, and it's going to be a lot more difficult to make that showing. So I can't give you a silver bullet answer and say, yes, absolutely guaranteed if you provide X, Y, and Z, or no, you're absolutely not going to get approved. It just, it's very risky. And I think the better you're able to prepare for that, to have a good explanation about how you do really legitimately intend to return home, you have proof of your ties to your home country, like let's say that you actually own a house or something that you're going to return to. Sure, that makes it a little bit stronger, but it's by no means a guarantee.
Mhm. Absolutely. Next question. This person is curious to learn. I guess the answer is no, but he's curious to learn if you had any RFE denied because of day one CPT during the EB2 process, EB2 NNW.
No, I've never. Like I said, I've never had a denial on any of these day one CPT RFEs. And really, again, it's all about just getting the right documentation and spending the time necessary to actually respond to all the inquiries. I mean, if they ask you for one, two, three, four, five, six, and seven, and you only give them one and two, then you're going to get denied. So really, in those situations, especially with what's at stake, we're talking about at that point your I-485. Your ability to get a green card, probably at that point you're going to want to involve an immigration attorney, because even if it might cost a little bit of extra money, remember, this is the difference between having a green card and not having a green card. So it's worth spending that money, investing in that to make sure that you get a good outcome. Obviously we can't guarantee the particular results, or that the Trump administration isn't going to turn on a dime and start denying all these cases. Can that happen? Possibly. I just don't see it happening because it didn't happen the last time he was in office.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, last question. Next question. Would I also get questioned by USCIS relating to day one CPT when I'm changing my status to something like a marriage-based green card or like a I-130?
Now, generally not. So you have to understand there are different rules that apply to people who are so-called immediate relatives. Okay, an immediate relative is defined as somebody who's either the spouse, parent, or minor child of a U.S. citizen. So if you're a spouse of a U.S. citizen, for example, then the law is much more forgiving than if you are if you're trying to get a green card based on employment sponsorship. There's a completely different regime that is applicable there. So if I'm a U.S. citizen spouse, okay, and I'm applying for a green card, then they're generally not going to be scrutinizing my immigration history as much as they would if I was applying for an employment-based green card. And the only way that I would get denied is if for whatever reason they found not necessarily that I had fallen out of status. They can say that I violated my status and I can still get approved. They'd have to find like specifically fraud or maybe a crime that I've committed or I've done drugs or something like that, or I have something wrong with my body on my medical examination. Those are really the only grounds. But if they have a problem with your use of day one CPT, then that's just going to be chalked up to a status violation. And that's something that's forgiven for immediate relatives who are going through the green card process based on sponsorship by a U.S. citizen. So really, it's not going to be an issue in those situations.
Mhm. Absolutely. Let's go to the next question. So I think this is also a great question. So if somebody is transitioning from a current school to a day one CPT school, they're going to go over CVIS transfer. And
Yeah.
is there always going to be an unemployment period when transfer their CVIS status from A to B? And if
Hmm.
so, what will be the solution for their employer to submit their I-9 form for their
Yeah,
employment?
I mean, yeah, it's really again just like to answer my previous question. You can avoid a gap entirely, right? You just have to plan so that you get that CVIS record transferred out from school A and transferred into school B, so that they can then issue your I-20 that you need to start working. I'm not going to tell you that there might not be a day or two gap while they navigate the technology and get the thing printed so you can get an appointment and everything with your new advisor. But you just need to set it up so that it's transferred out and transferred in so that it can immediately be printed out and given to you.
Yeah, to our, experiences dealing with CVIS transfer, a gap, I would say like a day or two is pretty common in terms of,
Yeah.
the schools need to
It's
go
just
through two
logistics.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it needs to
Yeah.
go to two steps. One step is to receive your CVIS from the previous school, and the other step is to process CPT and then
Yeah.
generate an I-20 for you. So, but then the gap shouldn't be longer, to a point that you should be worried about that.
Exactly.
All right, next, while your OPT is pending, because the application is submitted 90 days before, can you still do CPT before your graduation date? I'm
Yes,
not
you
sure
can
that
do.
I
Yeah.
understand this.
Well, yeah, CPT, just to back all the way up to beginning part of my presentation, the CPT is what you're doing, the work that you're doing while you're working towards the completion of your degree. OPT is after your degree. So if you have applied for OPT, which can only take effect after you graduate, then within the 90-day window, because you can apply up to 90 days before you graduate, right? So you're still in the program during that 90-day period. So you can apply for and get CPT to work for during that 90-day period because you're still working towards your degree, haven't gotten your degree yet. And then you can have your OPT pick up on the very next day. And then you can start working on your OPT. So yeah, you can definitely do that.
Mhm. And then next question, we kind of already answered the first part. And the next part, I've already been approved for Canadian PR and needs to go there to activate it. So they need to travel internationally. So when I travel, both my visa and I-20 will be active. But visa, I think this is a pretty long question, but this person just wanted to know, should I consider renewing my visa when I was in Canada?
If you already have a visa that's valid, then I would recommend just using that visa because every time that you have to apply for a new one, there's always a risk you can get denied. And if they deny your new application, then guess what they're going to do is they're also going to cancel your existing visa. So only apply for a visa if you absolutely have to.
Absolutely. Next one, we have a person that is currently going through an RFE right now that's changing from a visitor visa to a F1 visa right now. So,
Okay. Hmm.
and then I guess one of the suggestions that I would have is to carefully go through the presentation that David just had, 20 minutes ago, and then you can review that whole part of presentation that covers a lot of RFEs and how do you prepare for it. But in terms of how should you be worried, I don't think this is a yes or no question that we can answer. But David, do you want to input anything in here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the specific RFE. I mean, you're probably, I would recommend you reach out to me and we can discuss it because you might need some help responding because changing from B2 is completely different from a lot of the other ones because unlike, let's say if I'm changing from H1B to F1, I can continue studying while I'm waiting for my F1 to come through. For a B2, I'm not allowed to study at all until my F1's approved. Okay. So there are lots of other issues there. There are also intent issues. They like to say, okay, well, you came into this country and then as a visitor, so you said you were going to come here for a visit, and then less than a month later, you apply for these schools and you submitted this application. We think you lied to us. Okay. Lots of complicated stuff there. So I can't give you any advice other than that I think you probably want to consult with a lawyer in preparing that response.
All right, next question. I think this question is for me. So this person wanted to know that this school that is once or turn attendance is recommended by us. So do you, after hearing what David said, do you have any suggestions for changing the list? I think all of the universities that we have worked with, we have carefully reviewed their accreditations and their on-site attendances. And just as David mentioned previously, I think there isn't any specific rule saying that, hey, you have to be there 3 times every semester, 6 times every semester, or else it's, not legit. So all of these schools have their own setups. Some schools will have 1 time per semester, 3 days. Some school will have 3 times 1 day. So it would just depend on how universities set up their programs. And through our large database working with all of our students, we don't think it is an issue for now. So if in the future Trump administration did come up with some policy changes, we'll definitely keep up with that and change our program list. But I think right now we're not worrying about that at all.
Right.
All right. Next one, I'm on an F2 dependent visa. How complex it can get to get day one CPT and go through H1B? I think this is a very, very general questions, but let's just focus on F2 to day one CPT. And then H1B, I think this is a whole different topic.
Yeah, I mean F2 is very similar to the B2 visa that I was talking about because it's the only other visa category where you're not allowed to actually enroll in school until your F1's approved. So just the general pathway you need to do is you'd have to file an application to change from F2 to F1, and then you go through your F1, you complete your studies, OPT, whatever, and then it's the same as what I was talking about in my original slides. You go from from F1 hopefully to OPT, hopefully to H1B, to OPT, and then hopefully to H1B. And if you don't get selected in the lottery, there are all those other alternatives you talked about. And if none of those alternatives work out, you always have day one CPT as an option. Okay, so it's really no different other than that the first step of the pathway, getting from F2 to F1, is what you need to actually be able to start studying. You can't just start studying once you apply. You have to actually have the approval.
Absolutely. All right, we'll cover the next one. Let's go to question number 19. My H1B is about to end. My green card process is underway, and it should take about 10 months more. Do you think I can take day one CPT for a couple months is just for the gap?
Well, why? I don't know why you do that. I mean, if you have H-1B and you already have a green card that's almost over, then if you have an employer that's willing to keep employing you, then you should be eligible to keep extending your H-1B. Because the way it works is H-1B generally it's limited to 6 years, right? But you can extend beyond the 6 years if you have a green card process that's either been pending at least a year or you've already gotten an approved I-140. So if it's been pending at least a year, you can extend your H-1B in 1 year increments. If you've got that I-140 done, which is the petition that you file for EB2, EB3, if it's an employer that's doing a sponsoring for you based on a labor certification. If you get that I-140, you can approve in 3 year increments. So God forbid, if you're on your 15th year of H-1B because you're in a backlog in the green card, that's totally fine. So I would always recommend keeping the H-1B if you can, because like I was saying before, it has the advantage over F1 and day one CPT in that it's a dual intent visa. So it allows you to travel back and forth without having to worry about proving an intention to return home, etc. It just provides a lot easier transition to the green card than day one CPT. Not to say that it's not an option. It's just that you would have to change status from H-1B to F1, and that's going to take some time. Okay, you're going to have to pay premium processing, and then you're going to be in the situation where how can you actually show that you qualify for F1? Okay, you've already got the green card process pending. So when at that point, you've already been here on H-1B for a long time, you've got the green card process pending, and somehow you have to convince immigration that you intend to return home, that's going to be a really, really hard case. So I would strongly recommend doing whatever you can to get that H-1B extended.
Absolutely. Uh, Due to timing's sake, I really hate to do this, but I think we'll take one last question for today. But we have a lot more questions for today. Don't worry about it. You can scan the QR code, talk to our consultants. If it is around day one CPT schools, we're happy to answer them for you. But you need some forms of legal consultations in your cases. We're happy to refer you to David so you guys can have further discussion on this. So let's go to the final questions we have for today. So this is a two-part. First part is, can I keep working with the same company for my H-1B when I transition to day one CPT?
Yes, Dan, that's the answer. Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Again, if you're on H-1B though, and you want to transition to day one CPT, then you run into that same problem I was just talking about, which is that you have to apply to change back to F1 status. And that's going to be a big challenge because you've already been there probably for a long time, and it's going to be difficult to show that you intend to go home.
Mhm. The second part of the question is, if somebody's perm is already filed and waiting for approval, is it safe to start day one CPT? What question could be expected during the F1 to H1B? So I guess this revolves three parts. So perm, F1, and then also getting ready to start H1B.
Well, perm's not going to affect anything, right? So perm is something that's filed with the Department of Labor. It's not filed with immigration. So that's not going to affect eligibility for F1. The only time when F1 is going to be implicated is if, let's say, the I-140 is filed after the perm is certified. And even then, there is binding case law. It's called Matter of Hossainpour, which is a case back from 1975 that says even if you have an approved I-140, you can still maintain F1 status because you can still intend to return home. So yeah, as you get through the process. So if let's say the typical perm process is the first step is the perm labor certification you file with the Department of Labor. I'd say probably no risk or no impact on ability to get F1 status. Okay. Then the next step is the I-140 that is filed once that perm is certified. It could be, I mean, the question is asked on the application form if a petition's ever been filed for you, and you have to disclose that. But again, it shouldn't disqualify you from getting F1 because of that case that I just mentioned. And then the next step after that is getting the I-45. And that's where you're going to have some issues for a couple of reasons. First, that when you have to, when you get F1 status, you have an I-20 form that you're required to sign that says you intend to, that you're only intending a temporary stay. Well, if you've already applied for an I-45, then that's going to be a huge issue because they could say, oh, you're lying on that by signing that form. Big problem there. Okay. But generally, when you got the I-45 filed, it's going to be a moot point because you're eligible to apply for an EAD, and you'll hopefully be able to get one of those and avoid any or minimize any gaps in employment. So it really is a hierarchy of risk. I certainly, by the time you get your I-45 filed and pending, it's going to be a lot more difficult to go back to F1 or keep even F1.
Mm. Well put. All right, I guess we're gonna wrap up today's session. I want to thank everybody for coming in. If you missed some part of the presentations or the Q&A, don't worry about it. We will send you a link of the presentation and the recordings probably a couple of days later when we're done processing that. So expecting an email from us. And I do want to spend a time to especially thank David for today. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for spending the time to walk everybody through so detailedly about day one CPT and also other immigration options that they have and answer patiently about their questions. So thank you so much for today, and thank you everyone for coming in. And hopefully we can see each other very soon in another webinar.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting, Ryan. Take
Thank
care
you,
now.
David. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.